and welcome to the ET Now special, The World in 2014, a Strobe Talbot exclusive. And joining me in the studio is Strobe Talbot, President of Brookings Institution. Strobe, thank you so much for coming down to our studios here in Mumbai. Firstly, I want to ask you, the weather in the US probably best describes the nature of the relationship right now between India and the US. What do you make of this? What do you make of this standoff? The Indian Prime Minister referred to it a week ago, calling it a temporary blip. Do you think it's just a temporary blip, or are we back to the 90s?
You did say the weather in the U.S., right?
That's right.
Well, I left Washington, D.C. I can't translate this into centigrade, but Washington, D.C. is a more or less southern town. It was 7 degrees below zero Fahrenheit, which I think is somewhere in the neighborhood of minus 20. No, I don't think the temperature of the U.S.-Indian relationship is anywhere near that chilly. Mm-hmm. But it isn't what it ought to be. This incident in New York, which now finally the locus is no longer in New York, the lady in question is on her way home, has really caught everybody by surprise, I think. The facts caught people by surprise. What happened caught people by surprise. But much more importantly, a lot of us in the United States who care deeply about the bilateral relationship thought that the fundamentals, the tensile strength of the relationship was strong enough to not be terribly damaged by something of this kind, regrettable as it was. And we've had to recalibrate a little bit. I'm hoping that now that at least an interim solution has been found, mm-hmm. Which is that she's on her way home, maybe we will find the damage wasn't as bad as it has seemed for the last several weeks.
Mm-hmm. You spoke about the fact that everyone in Washington was caught by surprise.
Not just Washington.
Even everywhere. But was it also partly because of the way New Delhi reacted to it, probably in a very uncharacteristic manner?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, and I don't think it was just New Delhi. Mm-hmm. My sense from following the Indian press before, I follow the Indian press closely all the time, particularly when I have a trip coming up, it seems to be a national reaction in some ways, one that we can understand. I mean, you're a proud country, you're justly proud of your foreign service. The Ministry of External Affairs, of course, took it as an institutional insult. All of that is now very clear to us. Our Secretary of State has come out and said that he regrets what happened. Very careful to caveat that by not making a judgmental comment on the legal case, because, of course, we keep our judiciary quite separate from our diplomacy. Yeah, it was a shock.
We don't want to get into the legal case at all, Strobe, but there is this
among other things because we don't know the facts.
Absolutely. But there is this feeling that probably, Washington could have walked that extra mile. Was it possible for Washington to do that at all?
I've heard that phrase a number of times during my visit here to Mumbai. I'm not sure what that means. I think that once it became clear that aside from the merits of the charges against her and the workings of our justice system, that there was a kind of rough edge, shall we say, to her treatment. That is already happened. There's nothing you can do to go back and change that, other than to say, as Secretary Kerry did, that he regretted that. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure what the extra mile means. Now, let's give our diplomats credit. I'm not a professional diplomat all my life, but I've spent some time in diplomacy, and I've always felt that diplomacy is most likely to be successful when it is quiet and it's behind the scenes. And one thing that was a handicap to your superb ambassador, Jaishankar, in Washington, and our very fine ambassador, Nancy Powell, in Delhi, is that for a while there, they were not able to work on this issue quietly because of all of the uproar publicly. But they have still, they and others, have been able to come up with a solution that at least gets her out of the United States. What will happen with further legal action with regard to her is in the future, but I hope that we can all, with public support, get back to the larger agenda of the relationship.
Yeah, I want to talk about that big picture. How hopeful are you that, through the diplomatic channels we will find a solution, through this problem and get back to the, strong relationship that both countries have?
I'm not only hopeful, I'm quite confident that we can. Now the question is how long it's going to take, because there have been a number of steps taken on the Indian side having to do with institutions that had nothing to do with all of this, like the American Club in Delhi and that kind of thing. I would hope that there could be a just as there has been an effort to tamp down the uproar over the case itself, I hope that there would be a very short period of time before we get back to normal in other areas.
All right, let's move away from this and talk about India. You are a frequent visitor to India. You've seen this country evolve over the years. What do you make of all that's happening around India over the last couple of years? Do you get the feeling that India is a democracy in transition and there seems to be this uproar, against the political class in general?
Well, I would resist a little bit, Sandeep, the idea of a democracy in transition. I mean, it is a robust, well-established, often raucous democracy. So is ours. There's the cliche that we're the oldest, the U.S. is the oldest modern democracy and India is the largest. Both are true. And Indian democracy has been around for a long time. So I think it would be condescending for me or somebody to say that it's in transition. It's going through a period of self-examination because there are a lot of Indians who are dissatisfied with governance, particularly at the national level, but also at the state level. And guess what? Same thing is going on in the United States. In fact, I would even put it into a broader frame, Sandeep, and say democracy around the world is at least seen to be underperforming by its constituents, and in some cases is in crisis. I wouldn't say it's in crisis in your country or mine, but it is certainly getting a lot of feedback from the people that the democracy is supposed to represent, that they're not happy with the quality and the efficacy, the fairness of the way that democracy is playing out. And I want to stress that we have something of a backlash in our country that's manifest on the right, if I can put it that way, by the Tea Party, on the left by the Occupy movement.
But how have you mapped the, the emergence of the Aam Aadmi Party or the AAP? I'm sure in your last visit to India, probably you wouldn't have heard of this gentleman called Arvind Kejriwal, and in 1 year's time, he's just caught the imagination of at least the middle class, and his, economic ideology, while it seems to be more left of center, but the fact of the matter is that even, even corporates are now backing him. How do you map such a trend?
Well, I'm not in a position, even though I'm a journalist and therefore can fly into a country and spend 3 days and write an article about it. Fortunately, I don't have to do that. I've learned an awful lot about the AAP just in a couple of days that I've been here. But I guess my gut feeling is it's a healthy development because it shows that Indian democracy, which has of course never been just a two-party system like ours in the United States, can react to popular discontent with the status quo by permitting the creation of a new player in the scene. And one thing that I'm I'm sure that we'll come to the question of our own democracy and how that's likely to play out in 2016 or 2014 for that matter as well. But one thing that we don't really have an option for in the United States, because our two-party system is so baked into American democracy going back to the 19th century, you do have an option for it, which is new parties can arise that represent what is clearly a large part of public opinion here.
But how do you think...
So that strikes me as healthy.
Great. But how do you think is Washington reading into all that's happening in New Delhi? There is an increasing, there's a fair chance that we may not necessarily have a strong government in 2014. We may not have a party large enough to form a decisive mandate. What is an ideal scenario from Washington's point of view?
Well, I'm not sure there is an ideal scenario, except that we've been there before. We've seen exactly the situation you described in the past. When I was in the State Department in the 90s, There were some upheavals and twists and turns of Indian democracy. We just, we go with the flow. We wait to see what the Indian people and their vast wisdom do and how that translates into a new government, and then we work with the new government.
Will Washington warm up to Narendra Modi, given the history of...
Look, the personality is not the issue. The integrity of the system is the issue. Whoever the Indian people choose to be their leader is going to be a very, very important partner of the United States, assuming that he or she wants to be. And I can't imagine India having a leader that wouldn't want to maintain a high degree of continuity with the extraordinary change that has taken place in Indian-U.S. relations since the going back to the 90s. I would say it goes back really all the way to the early 90s when India decided to open up to the world its economy. I worked for a president who said it's the economy, stupid. The fact that the Indian economy is now open to the world, in a way, set the ground for the and the end of the Cold War, which happened about the same time. I mean, one of the curses and one of the great tragedies of U.S.-Indian relations historically was that in the eyes of Washington, during the Cold War, India was, I think, simplistically at best, and fallaciously, you could even say, seen to be on the other side of the Cold War. And then when the Cold War ended and India opened up its economy, that made good things possible, and a lot of good things have happened since then. And I would think that whatever the outcome of your elections later this year, that trend will continue.
So even if Narendra Modi were to emerge as a prime minister, you don't think ties between India and U.S. would take a look?
Why should they? I mean, among other things, and I don't want to imply any preference on my part for who emerges as a victor. It's none of my business. It's none of the United States' business. I just think that they're, fierce as the competition between the parties are, and as you were saying earlier, Sandeep, it could be not just two parties. You could be looking at some kind of coalition scenario. I've had a couple of Indian friends who've spelled that out to me. There will be enough of a consensus on the need to keep India's economy growing, to keep India's emergence not just as a major regional power, but as a world power, and to keep the bilateral relationship with the United States strong. That will be the case no matter what the outcome is.
So we'll take a break on that note, but on the other side, we're going to talk about the U.S.-Iran talks and what kind of an impact could that have on global economics as well. We'll also talk of what are things that India needs to do in terms of its reforms so that U.S. corporates do start investing in this country as well. We'll step into a short break, back with lots more on the other side. Strobe, I want to talk about the end game in Afghanistan, because there's a fair amount of concern here in India on what happens next as Western troops leave Afghanistan. Do you think it could lead to a fair amount of escalation and tension between India and Pakistan? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, it is. I don't mean to quibble, but the end game is, of course, borrowed from chess. There's no end to the game. You were stuck with Afghanistan as a near neighbor. You will be for a long time. We, the United States, are stuck with a huge stake in the importance of this region. We have had a very traumatic experience in Afghanistan, as pretty much everybody who tries to deal with that country has. I think that the key thing is really, as much as anything, up to Pakistan. If Pakistan continues to see Afghanistan as, to go to the chess metaphor again, a board on which they have to play some sort of zero-sum game against India, that's going to be bad for Pakistan, it's going to be bad for Afghanistan, and it's going to be tough on you, and it'll also be bad for the region as a whole, including Iran, which you indicated a minute ago we were going to come to.
Yeah. And Pakistan is unpredictable, so I guess it's going to be very tough for us to speculate on what could
Well, I hope
happen.
it's unpredictable, because insofar as it's predictable, Pakistan seems to be still driven largely because of the influence of the military and the intelligence services there, to see India as the existential threat to Pakistan's existence. That is objectively, clearly not true, and has not been true for a very long time. The existential threat to Pakistan comes from within Pakistan, and those parts of Pakistan that the central government doesn't even control. And if Afghanistan slides back into being Al-Qaedistan, Talibanistan, that is going to feed the threat to Pakistan inside of Pakistan as well as on its borders. And I got all the way through those couple of sentences without even mentioning India. India is not the threat to Pakistan, and at some point there has to be a critical mass of recognition of that in Pakistan, or it's going to be very bad news for that country, and tough on you folks.
Let's move from South Asia to Central Asia, because there is some sort of a breakthrough now which has been in the works. How hopeful are you that the US-Iran nuclear talks will lead to some sort of a resolution? Can Washington trust Iran?
Well, the old Reagan line was trust but verify. Some in the United States, I think John McCain being one, has said distrust and verify. I think the administration's position is pretty smart and seems to be getting support from your government and a lot of the expert opinion here. And that is, let's test the proposition that there are some positive trends inside of Iran which can be nurtured from the outside. One is that Iran is the inheritor of a great civilization. It has a young and cosmopolitan population. You know, they're not only reading Tehran, reading Lolita in Tehran, they're plugged into the internet, they're sophisticated, a lot of them speak English, and they are increasingly fed up with this obscurantist clerical regime that oppresses them. But they do have a degree of democracy, and they now have a new president who seems to be testing the proposition of reform. So the real question is, are they prepared to limit the nuclear program that they have to peaceful uses? And the Obama administration is now committed to doing that. But we have to keep, the international community, have to keep the pressure on. Which means that there may not be as many commercial opportunities for India as there would be if there were a complete ending of the sanctions. But here there is an end game. If the end game leads to a win-win solution, which is that Iran is freed from the sanctions, and the world is freed from the threat of Iran going nuclear, then there will be all kinds of opportunities for India and other countries. And I realize that India could benefit greatly from an improvement in that relationship, and we'd like to see that happen.
You spoke about all kinds of opportunities. Markets around the world are excited about the opportunity of having access to a huge amount of crude oil as well, and that is big as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's very important for the Iranian people to have the kind of life that they deserve. The sanctions have never been, I know that the Iranian people have to bear a lot of the brunt of it, but it's because of the policies of their government, and there are signs that the policies of their government may change. Now, the tonality has changed dramatically. Is that tonality and willingness to accept what seem to be the outlines of an interim agreement suggests that it may change, but we have to keep testing the proposition, and the more solidarity there can be in the international community. I know that there's not total unanimity between India and the United States on the NPT. That's another question. But certainly there is solidarity between India and the United States that we'd like to see Iran become a modern, secular, civilized state that doesn't, among other things, support terrorism.
Sure.
And I'm saying that looking at a citizen of a country that has suffered from terrorism terribly, as has our country.
We were talking about markets, and I want to take this to markets and economy. How do you map the economic recovery in the U.S.? We've just heard Dr. Nouriel Roubini, who's widely perceived as Dr. Doom, turn bullish, say that he thinks that U.S. is going to lead economic recovery in 2014. What's your sense?
Inshallah. We'll see. I'm at the Brookings Institution. I have a lot of colleagues who are very sophisticated economists. And being economists, they don't agree with each other, or sometimes don't agree with themselves on everything. But I do think that there is a consensus that there is basis for cautious optimism that the United States is in fact going to recover because of the inherent resilience of our economy. And one reason it is resilient is that we have minimized the extent to which government regulations restrict trade. And we'd love to see more of that phenomenon here in India.
Since we are talking about the world in 2014, the world in 2014 will also not have easy money. The quantitative easing program is going to come to an end. How do you see markets coping with this new normal? We here in India are very anxious because the emerging markets have been big beneficiaries of this flood of capital. How do you think will the world cope with this new normal?
Well, I would hope by loosening up rather than cracking down with additional regulations.
You spoke about loosening up on regulations, and the sense that one gets is that US Inc. is pretty disappointed with India. The fact that India hasn't really probably walked its talk on reforms. There's been a few missteps as well. The retrospective taxes and all of that. You engage with a lot of corporates as well. What are the sense that you get? What does corporate America think of the India story right now?
Well, I wouldn't say disappointment characterizes it, because in order to be disappointed, you have to have had very high expectations. Corporate America that has had a lot of experience with India appreciates the really night and day difference for the better that has taken place since the early 90s. But there's also an awareness, because they're having year-to-year experiences with India, that there are still a lot of obstacles to foreign direct investment and that kind of thing. I won't call it the license raj, but there certainly are an awful lot of regulations well beyond what American companies find they have to deal with in other countries.
So do they also believe that there needs to be more transparency and ease of doing business? Because that's the sense that we get speaking to a lot of people. Is that?
Absolutely, I do hear that. But it's not offered in a complaining tone or a disappointed tone. It's more hope that there will be further progress, particularly once you get past your elections. And we here again, this is a basic similarity between India and the United States. When we go into our election season, as we are beginning to now, even though it's
2 years away,
2 years away, it gets harder and harder to have really sensible long-term policies, because the politicians are all thinking in the short term. So we go through that too. You're going through it now. There's kind of a feeling, well, let's wait until we see what the spring and the summer bring, and then let's hope we can get back to real business come the fall.
Okay, so that gets me to my last few questions on the elections in 2016. Who do you think is the race going to boil down to?
Well, my crystal ball is about as good as anybody else's, or about as bad as anybody else's. There's no question that on the Democratic side, Senator/Secretary Clinton is very well positioned. But at this point in the campaign, back in 2007, 2008, she was very well positioned and ended up, of course, not getting the nomination. An experience from which she learned a lot, and no doubt she's going to be applying those lessons to what she does next, although she has not, let's be very clear about that, she has not explicitly decided, and certainly hasn't explicitly announced whether she's going to be in. But the presumption is that she'll be a very strong candidate. But there are challengers, Elizabeth Warren being one, on the, as it were, to the left of Mrs. Clinton. And there are some strong candidates on the Republican side. Chris Christie is the one that comes most to mind. The interesting challenge for Chris Christie is that he's a highly pragmatic basically moderate Republican. And that is the kind of candidate that the Republicans need in order to win back the White House. Now, the last two candidates that they had, Mitt Romney and John McCain, were moderate, pragmatic Republicans. But in order to get the nomination, they had to move so far to the right that they got captured by the right. And American presidential elections are almost always won at the center. And so if it's Christie, he'll have to get the necessary support, including from the Tea Party, or the influence of the Tea Party will go down, and then move back to the center, in which case he would be formidable. But if he is able to do that, he will do something that his two predecessors for the Republicans weren't able to do.
Stroop Talbot, completely out of time, but thank you so much for chatting with us and sharing your worldview for 2014. Hope to chat with you soon again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandeep.
Such a pleasure.
Pleasure for me.